Dear students and friends, welcome you in today's lecture on Immanuel Kant. Kant is known as one of the greatest modern political philosophers. And before proceeding further, let's highlight the points which will be focused during the current lecture. Life and important works of Kant, basic tenets of Kant's political philosophy, his views on enlightenment, democracy and state, his conception of rights and freedom. Life sketch. So let's begin this lecture with a discussion on Kant's life. Kant was born on April 22nd, 1724 in Prussia, which is now Germany. He belonged to a humble family. In the year 1740, Kant was enrolled at the University of Königsberg as a theology student, but he got soon attracted to mathematics and physics. In the year 1746, Kant had to leave the university to help his family. For a decade, he worked as a private tutor. However, in 1755, Kant returned to the University of Königsberg to continue his education. In the same year, he received his doctorate of philosophy. And for the next 15 years, he worked as a lecturer and tutor and wrote major works on philosophy. In 1770, he became a full professor at the university and teaching metaphysics and logic. During this time, he published several papers including General Natural History and Theory of Heavens, dealing with scientific questions, exploring the middle ground between rationalism and empiricism. In 1781, Kant published the first important work titled The Critique of Pure Reason, an enormous work and one of the most important books on Western political thought. In this book, he attempted to explain how reason and experiences interact with thought and understanding. This revolutionary proposal explained how an individual's mind organizes experiences into understanding the way the world works. Though the Critique of Pure Reason received little attention at that time, Kant continued to refine his theories in a series of essays that comprised the Critique of Practical Reason and Critique of Judgment. Kant continued to write on philosophy until shortly before his death in the year 1804. With this, we move to the next section of this lecture, that is to give you an introduction of Kant's political philosophy. Kant is generally considered as one of the greatest modern political philosophers. Kant's early works are more concerned with science than with philosophy. In his Critique of Pure Reason, published in 1781, Groundwork of Metaphysics of Morals 1785, Critique of Practical Reason 1788, Critique of Judgment 1790, and other major works, Kant made the great contribution to metaphysics, epistemology and ethics, for which he is best known. Kant wrote his social and political philosophy in order to champion the Enlightenment in general and the idea of freedom in particular. His writings on political philosophy consist of one of major book and several shorter works. The Doctrine of Right, first part of his two Metaphysics of Morals, and first published as a stand-alone book in 1797, contains virtually every directly political topic he treats. The other works include a useful short summary of his discussion of the basis and role of the state in the second section of the essay, Theory and Practice, an extended discussion of international relations in the essay titled Towards Perpetual Peace, and the essay titled An Answer to the Question, What is Enlightenment? Other published material relevant to the topics include material on history, on practical philosophy in general, and for his social philosophy, his work on religion, education and anthropology. Kant held that every rational being had both an innate right to freedom and a duty to enter into a civil condition governed by social contract in order to realize and preserve that freedom. Kant developed a revolutionary account of reality, which argued that the world is the way it is because our minds shape it that way. The world we experience is characterized by cause and effect, time and space, and so forth, because these are built in our minds to generate a view of the world that we can comprehend. Another distinctive feature of Kant's political philosophy is its cosmopolitanism, globalism, or internationalism, as discussed in detail slightly later. He does not separate domestic politics from international politics. While assessing cosmopolitan character of Kant's political philosophy, prominent scholar Wolfgang said, while Hobbes, Locke and Rousseau were satisfied with the overcoming the interpersonal natural condition and allowed that authority of political philosophy to end at the border of the state, Kant took political philosophy beyond the borders of states and saw its foremost object in the highest political good. The cosmopolitanism or cosmopolitan right is an important component of perpetual world peace. Interaction among the people of the world, Kant notes, has increased in recent times. Now, a violation of right on one place of earth is felt in all, as people depend upon one another and know about one another more and more. Hence, violations of cosmopolitan right would make more difficult the trust and cooperation necessary for perpetual peace among states. His cosmopolitan views are seen as the source behind the global organization like the League of Nations. After this brief introduction about the Kant's philosophy, our focus now will be upon the following: his views on the Enlightenment, Republic and democracy, his views on freedom as the basis of the state, as it constitutes the core of Kant's political philosophy. And finally, we will also discuss his views about the cosmopolitanism. Let me begin with his views on the Enlightenment, Republic and democracy. Kant was a central figure in the philosophy of enlightenment. One of his popular essays, An Answer to the Question, What is Enlightenment? Kant discusses enlightenment in terms of the use of an individual's own reason. To be enlightened is to emerge from one's self-incurred immature status to a mature ability to think for oneself. Another essay, What does it mean to orient oneself in the thought? Kant defines enlightenment as the maxim of always thinking for oneself. Given his emphasis on enlightenment, Kant insists that the proper political system is one that not only allows individuals to think for themselves about political issues and contains a mechanism such as voting to translate those well-reasoned opinions into government policy. In his discussion in the perpetual peace of the traditional division of the types of government, Kant classifies government in two dimensions. The first is the form of sovereignty concerning who rules, and here Kant identifies the traditional three forms. First, rule by one person. Second, rule by a small group of people. Third, rule by all people. The second is the form of government concerning how those people rule, and here Kant offers a variation on the traditional good or bad dichotomy, either republican or despotic. By republican, Kant means separation of the executive power from the legislative power. Despotism is their unity such that the same ruler both gives and enforces laws, in essence making an individual private will into the public will. Republics require representations in order to ensure that the executive power only enforces public will by insisting that the executive enforces laws which were representatives of the people. But a republic is compatible with a single individual acting as legislator, provided that others act as executives. For example, a monarch would issue laws in the name of the people's will, but the monarch's ministers would enforce those laws. Kant's claim that such a government is republican showcases his view that a republican government need not require actual participation of the people in making the laws. even through elected representatives, as long as the laws are promulgated with the whole united will of the people in mind. Kant does nonetheless think that an elected representative legislator is the best form of a republic. When Kant discusses voting for representatives, he adheres to many prevailing prejudices of the time. The right to vote requires being one's own master, and hence having property or some skill that can support one independently. The reason given for this, that those who must acquire something from another to make a living alienate what belongs to them, is so vague that Kant himself admits in a footnote, and I quote, "It is, I admit, somewhat difficult to determine what is required in order to be able to claim the rank of a human being who is his own master," unquote. Kant also leaves women out of the voting population for what he calls natural reasons which are left unspecified. Kant's state then does not require that actual decisions are made by the people at large, even through elected representatives. He holds that a single individual or small group can themselves adequately represent the people at large simply by adopting the point of view of the people. Insistence on representative system is not insistence on elected representative system. Nonetheless, it is clear that Kant holds that such an elective representative system is ideal. Republican constitutions, he claims, are prone to avoid war because when the consent of the people is needed, they will consider the costs they must endure in a war, fighting, taxes, destruction of property, etc. Whereas a non-republican ruler may be insulated from such concerns. In the Doctrine of Right, he notes that a republican system not only represents the people, but does so by all the citizens united and acting through their delegates. The other component of Kant's political philosophy is his views about the freedom as the basis of the state. According to Kant, there is only one innate right, and that's freedom, independence from being constrained by another's choice, insofar as it can coexist with the freedom of every other in accordance with the universal law. Kant rejects any other basis for the state in particular, arguing that the welfare of citizens cannot be the basis of the state power. He argues that a state cannot legitimately impose any particular conception of happiness upon its citizens. To do so would be for the ruler to treat citizens as children, assuming that they are unable to understand what is truly useful or harmful to themselves. This can be understood in the light of Kant's more general claim that moral law cannot be based upon happiness or any other given empirical good. In the Critique of Practical Reason, Kant argues that happiness, that is the agreeableness of life when things go in accordance with one's wishes and desires, although universally sought by human beings, is not specific enough to entail any particular universal desire in human beings. Further, the general conception of happiness is too vague to serve as the basis of a law. Hence, a universal principle of right cannot be based upon happiness, but only on something truly universal, such as freedom. The universal principle of right Kant offers is thus: any action is right if it can coexist with everyone's freedom in accordance with a universal law, or if on its maxim the freedom of choice of each can coexist with everyone's freedom in accordance with universal law. This explains why happiness is not universal, but why freedom is universal. His concern in political philosophy is not with the laws of nature determining a human being's choice, but by other human beings determining a human being's choice. Hence, the kind of freedom Kant is concerned with in political philosophy is individual freedom of action. Still, the universality of political freedom is linked to transcendental freedom. Kant assumes that a human being's use of choice, at least when it is properly guided by reason, is free in the transcendental sense. Since every human being does enjoy transcendental freedom by virtue of being rational, freedom of choice is a universal freedom attribute, and this freedom of choice is to be respected and promoted even when this choice is not exercised in rational or virtuous activity. Presumably, respecting freedom of choice involves allowing it to be effective in determining actions. That's why Kant calls political freedom or independence from being constrained by another's choice the only innate right. One might still object that this freedom of choice is incapable of being the basis of a pure principle of right for the same reason that happiness was incapable of being its basis, namely that it is too vague in itself and that when specified by particular decision individuals make with their free choice, it loses its universality. Kant holds that this problem does not arise for freedom, since freedom of choice can be understood both in terms of its content and its form. Freedom is universal in the proper sense because, unlike happiness, it can be understood in such a way that it is susceptible to specification without losing its universality. The very existence of a state might seem to some as a limitation of freedom, since a state possesses power to control the external freedom of individual citizens through force, and this is the basic claim of anarchism. Kant holds in contrast that the state is not an impediment to freedom but is the means for freedom. State action that is a hindrance to freedom can, when properly directed, support and maintain freedom if the state action is aimed at hindering actions that themselves would hinder the freedom of others. Given a subject's action that would limit the freedom of another subject, the state may hinder the first subject to defend the second by hindering a hindrance to freedom. Such state coercion is compatible with the maximal freedom demanded in the principle of right because it does not reduce freedom but instead provides the necessary background conditions needed to secure freedom. The amount of freedom lost by the first subject through direct state coercion is equal to the amount gained by the second subject through lifting the hindrances to actions. State actions sustains the maximal amount of freedom consistent with identical freedom for all without reducing it. Freedom is not only the basis for principles underlying the state. In theory and practice, Kant makes freedom the basis of three principles. First, the freedom of every member of the state as a human being. Second, the equality of each with every other as a subject. And third, the independence of every member of a commonwealth as a citizen. Freedom stresses the autonomous right of all individuals to conceive of happiness in their own way. Interference with another's freedom is understood as coercing the other to be happy as the former sees it. The direct link to action comes when pursuing that autonomously chosen conception of happiness. Each may pursue happiness as they see fit, provided that their pursuit does not infringe upon others' similar pursuits. Kant on cosmopolitanism and law and peace. More than 2 centuries, Kant published one of his most celebrated political writings titled To Perpetual Peace. He introduced cosmopolitan law, which has puzzled various generations of scholars. This concept is examined by a way of comparison of Kant's contemporary international theories. It is argued that it plays a crucial role in Kant's system of international relations, while on the other hand, cosmopolitan law safeguards a state's sovereignty vis-à-vis other states. On the other, it is an innovation which allows the international community to monitor the internal affairs of its members. The concept can be seen as a forerunner of the League of Nations and Universal Declaration of Human Rights. sharing with it the idea that some rights have a universal value, even if they are not actually protected by any secular institution. Let me conclude what we discussed so far. Kant is one of the most influential modern political philosophers. He occupies an important place in the history of political thought. Kant wrote his social and political philosophy in order to champion the Enlightenment in general and the idea of freedom in particular. Kant held that every rational being had both an innate right to freedom and a duty to enter into a civil condition governed by social contract in order to realize and preserve that freedom. His moral and political philosophy has influenced many political thinkers, particularly Hegel, Habermas, John Rawls, etc. His ideas on morality and social contract have influenced Rawls' theory of justice and Habermas' discourse on ethics. He strengthened the trend started by Rousseau, whose earliest reflections were contained in the idealist affirmation of Plato and Aristotle. Through Kant, we once again find politics and ethics drawn closer to so much that the latter dominates the former, thereby replacing the contractualism and utilitarian trends. According to Professor Vaughan, by binding politics to ethics, Kant gave an entirely fresh turn to the conception both of right in general and of such subordinate notions as those of property and of contract in particular. It is because of his influence that the idealist trend remained dominant throughout 19th century. With this, we conclude today's lecture. Hope you enjoyed it. Take care. Goodbye.